pageantry and tradition of college football is back, and it's time to circle the wagons. We're going to get into it this time on Iceman and Coach. College football is back, folks. Week 0 is upon us, and it is time for the Iceman and Coach to break down all of college football over the next hour and a half. Welcome to the show, everybody. As always, this is the Iceman, Matt Freites, and across from me, virtually anyway, that is the coach, Brad Powell, and Touchdown Jesus. What's up, buddy?
Iceman, doing well, my friend, and it's time, right? We are just a couple days away, right, Amir? About 72 hours away from kicking off college football season on Saturday with Week 0 action. Super excited about that. I think that, as we discussed the other night with our NFL preview, football is sort of our wheelhouse, and we are here to get things in motion this season.
I would say so. And I would say that there's a lot to talk about in college, more so than the NFL, because I think that there were more changes that happened over the course of the offseason in college football. And honestly, most of the changes were from last year, about a year ago. I don't know if you remember, we did that episode with Tyler Budge, a shout out to him, and we all talked about what conference realignment might look like. And the day that that episode went live, all of the news broke out about Colorado leaving and Utah and Washington and Oregon, and the entire landscape changed literally overnight. And last year felt like the end of an era, and it almost feels like we're starting clean with a new slate. Doesn't it feel that way?
It does. I think that we are on the eve of the most exciting college football season ever, with the 12-team playoff coming. I know there's some purists out there who are a little upset about the playoff expanding, but I think that more playoff football is more quality football is better for everyone, especially the fans, and I'm really excited about it. And I don't know how you could say that it isn't the most exciting football season to date. I mean, everybody always looks forward to the next one, but there's just something different, man, about this upcoming season. There
is, and I think also everything that happened in the offseason with the emergence of College Football 25 for the new generation of video games. I know that was a big nostalgia pull for a lot of people. And it does. It almost feels like the convergence of all of the old era into this new era. And so many things happen in the offseason, too. You think about Nick Saban no longer being on the sideline, Jim Harbaugh, after winning a national title, going to the NFL, Jimbo Fisher finally getting fired, not being a head coach right now, at least not in major college football. And a lot of the conferences, while they have the same name, don't have the same look to them. And we're going to get into that later when we get into the Big Four. But everything is different now. NIL, the transfer portal, the conference realignment. And honestly, though, at like a high level, I think you're right. I think we win in the end because we're going to get some badass matchups this year.
Yeah, we're going to get incredible matchups. And that's one benefit of the expanding conferences is you're going to get more quality games. It's going to be great to see, Oregon and USC mixing it up in the Big Ten. We'll talk more about some of the other expansion later. But as you mentioned, some of these coaches that have been a staple in college football for decades have moved on. And it is a bit of a changing of the guard. We do still have a couple successful coaches with some accolades, that are hanging on. Obviously, Dabo's got a couple championships, and he's got a well-established, entrenched program and tradition at Clemson. Kirby Smart is, probably early on in what could be a decades-long dynasty at Georgia if they can keep their noses clean down there. It seems like they deal with a lot of off-the-field issues. But other than that, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity. Who's going to step up and sort of fill those voids of being, the Mount Rushmore of active college football coaches?
Do you see any negatives to the new paradigm? I know a lot of purists, Budge is probably one of them, who wishes we could go even further back in time to get back to a more pure version of college football. Do you see any negatives to this, or are you kind of just embracing the future and saying, bring it on, because every Saturday is going to be great?
I'm kind of embracing it. And, typically I lean on the side of tradition almost always, but here, I just know there's no avoiding it. So let's just rip the Band-Aid off and get to it. And, I think calling the days of old in college football pure is a little disingenuous, because a lot of the same things that are happening now in NIL were happening then, just under the
Yep.
table, behind closed doors. And so I think it might as well just all be on the surface. I mean, I heard, an interview with Utah's coach the other day, and of course his name escapes me at the moment. Anyways, he said that he anticipates, just sooner than later, here in a couple of years, it's going to look a lot like a minor league for the NFL. And he thinks there's a good, probably around 60 teams are going to make up this super league or whatever, and there's a good chance by then the players will just be employees, and it will function essentially as a minor league for pro football. And one thing that they have, and I know that college football already is a feeder system for the pros, but one thing that I think they have in their favor that any other league that's attempted to sort of not compete with the NFL necessarily, but be a supplemental league to the NFL, whether it's the XFL, the USFL, the AFL, or whatever FL that exists, is they never have the brands. They don't have the brands, the established brands to build from. Who gives a crap about if you create the St. Louis Battlehawks, you know what I'm saying? But if all of a sudden your semi-pro minor league football team is the Alabama Crimson Tide, different story. And like I said, these programs are already functioning that way, so it's not really a drastic change or whatever. It's more a change in perspective, I think, from for the fans, and even kind of like the stuffy academics of these universities. It's going to be a lot for them to kind of wrap their heads around.
I think that also it's just a matter of, I know for me, I think that, and I might speak for a lot of people, is that the backdoor nature of a lot of it was sort of off-putting, because it did feel dirty. It did feel illegal. It did feel like you were doing something that wasn't on the up and up. And now it's happening, at least in broad daylight. And I guess I'd rather have that happen, to know that theoretically every team is on a level playing field. We know that that's not true from a dollars and cents perspective, but at least in terms of what the rules are and who's allowed to do what. Now, of course, there's always going to be ways in which these programs kind of in between the margins try to find ways to get competitive advantages when it comes to NIL, tampering, stuff like that. And all this is going to evolve, but it's here to stay. And I honestly believe that, yeah, it's just a semi-pro league now. And I think people like you and I have already felt that way. And this is just finally the unveiling of it. And we're here for it, man. I know I am. Cannot wait until the very first college game day. I know they're going to try to do it this weekend, but it's not really happening in earnest until Labor Day weekend.
Sure. And what another thing that is worth mentioning, the perception in the old days was, when there was these backdoor dealings happening, is the black eye sort of ended up on the school, right? The black eye was on the program and on the institution for doing these things. Now, the people that sort of have a negative light shed on them are the players, because you see firsthand them making these decisions based off of these auxiliary things like money and whatever else. I'm sure there's still some of these other things on the periphery that are happening, like places to live and cars and jobs and stuff for their families or handlers or whoever. And I mean, I'm seeing it firsthand right now, because there's some issues. Notre Dame has a commitment from a quarterback, Deuce Knight. He's from Mississippi. He committed last maybe in the winter time, somewhere around there. And all of a sudden, like, Auburn has put on like the full court press, and there's people are really losing faith that he's going to stay in the class at Notre Dame, because of all the things that the family was on board, everything else with Notre Dame, and a lot of things have changed. And as money and other stuff has been funneled his way. And so, and again, like, I see the people communicating about this on X or wherever else, and they're going after the kid, saying, hey, we see what he's all about, and things like that. And that's where I think the paradigm has shifted, because it's really, I don't know if you want to say revealing the character. I think that's a little aggressive, but it's certainly taken some of the heat off of the university. If anything, they can sort of take the high road and be like, hey, like, we did everything we could, and let these kids take the bag and go.
It's a little bit different than the pros, where there is no loyalty to, say, a team because it's a professional organization. It's a job, essentially. And so when a guy takes a salary somewhere else, I know a lot of the fans like to say, well, he should have stayed loyal. But let's face it, it's the pros, right? But in college, there's a different connection to these universities, to these establishments. And so when you have a player who commits and then leaves before fulfilling what a lot of fans think is the full nature of that commitment, they kind of get butthurt because they associate with that loyalty with the tradition of being at Alabama, the tradition of being at Notre Dame. When I think a lot of the people who are complaining would most likely do the same thing that a lot of these players are doing.
Of course,
You know
they
what I
would.
mean? And like, so along with this is going to come mass amounts of hypocrisy, probably from this show too at some point. But look, the new paradigm is here. The only thing that I want to talk about, and I think this speaks to the new paradigm, and it's something that you said about the NCAA. So I did not read up on this because personally, I was tired of hearing about it. I'm not even sure why it's even in the news. But the whole Michigan scandal seems to have come back and sort of risen again, sort of like touchdown Jesus behind you. And it's kind of silly. The NCAA, I think, punished in air quotes Jim Harbaugh, which is stupid because he's no longer a coach there anymore. And all of these text messages resurfaced from, I can't remember the guy. He has a great name. What's the guy's name?
Connor
Yes, thank
Stallions.
you. And text messages between him and I think the now head coach of
Yeah, Sharon Moore.
Sharon
Yeah.
Moore. And weird. Okay, the text messages were definitely weird, but text messages between two dudes, dudes say things all the time, locker room talk, if you want to say.
Right.
But the NCAA even doing anything at this point is laughable because it's over. The whole thing is over. And if conference realignment has shown me and you and just about everybody anything, is that the NCAA, they're figureheads now.
Yeah, it's a toothless beast. I just don't think there's any bite behind any of these punishments they try to hand down. I'm sure that, Jim Harbaugh all but scoffed at these punishments, if that's what you call them, when they came down.
Do you think didn't they send him a letter
Uh, Probably.
on
Yeah,
letterhead,
and I'm sure
NCAA
he
letterhead?
filed it appropriately in the garbage can.
Thank you.
But I think that there's some sort of sanctions that are coming down because like one of the assistant coaches helped a player get verified on Instagram. It's so dumb. It's like you cannot, Colin Cowherd, I give him credit. He made this analogy. He said that if you're going to make robbing a bank legal and then like write somebody a speeding ticket, he's like, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, or jaywalking. He said jaywalking. If all of a sudden robbing a bank was legal, but if you're going to write somebody a ticket for jaywalking, he's like, that's absurd. And that's what's happening with the NCAA. Like essentially you've put all the, you can pay the players, everything else is all above board, but my goodness, don't you dare help them get verified on social media. Like, it's just, how could they, it almost feels like satire. Like how do you not just laugh hysterically if you get that, that letter or email or whatever it is? Or, the athletic director comes in and like has to chastise you for your behavior. I just don't know how you don't like just crack up.
Well, at this point, too, when all these schools, especially like a Michigan, who's one of the cash cows in terms of dollars and cents for the NCAA, and it's like they don't have any power anymore. The universities are the ones that are bringing in the money. The players are the ones that are helping bring in the dollars. And I think that the sanctions, think about getting verified on Instagram. What does that have to do with playing on the football field? Nothing.
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. And
Nothing.
sure, it might have an effect on NIL or something like that. But look, let's face it, there's a lot of things that are going to have an effect on NIL. And I don't think that something like this is worth even, saying anything about anymore. And especially Michigan won the national title. They won it fair and square. All these things came out. And honestly, even if they did have somebody on the sideline, who cares? They were so much better than every other team anyway. And that's something that you and I talked about is that they didn't need to do it because they were so much better than everybody. So just drop it.
Yeah, the only difference is they got caught doing it. Everybody does it. And if you're not doing it, you're not trying to gain a competitive advantage somehow, then you're an idiot. And I have zero issues with, I stand by my prior stance. I have no issue with what Michigan did. I think it's stupid. I think it's a waste of time and resources for them to go after him about it. I don't think it sheds any negative light on the fact they won a national title. I think that's a legit well-earned national championship. And I'm not a Michigan apologist by any means. I'm a Notre Dame fan. I mean, there's a lot of bad blood between those two places. And so, but that being said, I know a good football team when I see one, and Michigan was a good football team,
No
sign
kidding.
stealing or not.
Yeah, I remember at the beginning of the year, a lot of people tried to tell us, so they're not playing anybody. Well, when they played any team of substance, they kicked their ass. So I don't think
they made everybody look like nobody.
Yes, they did.
I mean,
they 100% did. The best game that we watched last year was against Alabama, but even in that game, you felt like the better team won. And end of story. So Michigan is defending their national championship this year as we head into this. But a couple of things before we get into the breakdown of these conferences. First things first, Football Frenzy. Next Wednesday will be the very first one of this season, and it will be inclusive of college and the NFL. It'll be about 9:15 Eastern every Wednesday. It will be live during that time, and then we will replay certain segments of this, the college portion and the NFL, every Saturday and Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. So keep the lookout for that because that is what we have going on. But before we get into the conferences, man, you want to talk about the preseason rankings, and here they are, the preseason rankings. So just to kind of give a recap here, this is preseason. You know how I feel about preseason rankings. I think that they're total horseshit because it gives a lot of gives them a leg up. However, I have come around a little bit, and there needs to be some starting point. But let me ask you a question. Do you have any problem with Georgia being number one in this preseason poll?
No.
Okay.
Simply no, I do not.
Okay. Do you have any issue with Ohio State being number two?
No.
No.
I do not.
Okay. And I think after that is when things get really interesting because you have Oregon, Texas, and Alabama rounding out the top five. I think the most interesting one there is Alabama simply because Nick Saban is no longer there. Kalen DeBoer is the new head coach there. Lofty expectations in Alabama based off of their history, so that's interesting. But rounding out the top 10, we have Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin and the boys, Notre Dame, your team, Penn State, Michigan, and Florida State. And it looks pretty similar to the way that the season ended last year. Continuing on, 11, Missouri, 12, Utah, 13, LSU, 14, Clemson, 15, Tennessee, Oklahoma 16, Oklahoma State 17. Isn't that interesting? Those two teams right there. And
very interesting.
Yep, Kansas State at 18, Miami, the U is back as always at 19, Texas A&M, Sands, Jimbo Fisher at number 20, and we have Arizona, Kansas, USC, NC State, and my favorite, Iowa Hawkeyes at number 25. This is not a stat of the week, but do you want to hear a funny stat about Iowa already? They haven't even played a game yet.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so during their spring game, understand that they're playing, the offense, is playing the Iowa defense, which is probably going to be one of the best in the country. Cade McNamara, 7 of 21 in the spring game, and the offense had 43 total yards.
Jeez, I don't know why they can't figure out offense in Iowa City, man.
Brian Ferentz isn't there anymore, so
crazy. Yeah, we'll see what happens. But
defensively, they're going to be amazing.
Top 25 is interesting. Yeah, they're going to be great on defense. They always are. They're kind of a little like the Steelers, man. I know, obviously the uniforms are basically identical, but they're just they just win enough for Kirk Ferentz to keep his job and everything to be status quo. But the top 25 is interesting, and you're right. It's kind of it's bullshit in a way because you're kind of basing off how last year went while trying to factor in departures and incoming. And with the transfer portal, it's almost impossible to predict how good someone's going to be. And but you have to start somewhere. And you're right. It does give teams a leg up. And I think it could work both ways. Double-edged sword. Sure. It's good because if you start high, it's easy to stay up there, right? It's much higher to climb from further down the rankings. And I don't know. And then also, I think with the double-edged sword, in Kalen DeBoer's case, Alabama, you could be setting maybe an unrealistic expectation. Now, that's not, I don't think it is. Alabama's going to be extremely talented, and I think he's going to be just fine. And obviously, those fans are going to have sky-high expectations no matter where they're ranked. But, if you sit there and say, if you are top 5, and let's say that things go are a little rough in Tuscaloosa this year, especially early on, you're going to have people reacting in a very extreme way. And so I do think it could set a coach up for a little bit of an uphill battle when it comes to expectations if they are kind of prematurely ranked too high.
Well, it's interesting, too, because, again, with all the turmoil at Alabama, and even at Michigan, obviously they're still fielding an excellent team. They're going to have some returning players from last year's national championship team, but being number 9, the expectations are there. And they should be high at schools like that, no doubt. But when you're changing from a head coach that has either won multiple national championships or just coming off a national championship, it's hard to replicate that. But what do you say we get into the Big Four conferences, my man?
Let's do it.
All right. So the other thing you should know about us is that we are College Football 101. Coach said that last week about the NFL. It is true about college. We are general sports fans. We love to talk about football. So if you are looking for a super in-depth analysis in each of these teams, we implore you to go follow Tyler Budge because he is doing some great work in the college football world. He's a friend of the show, and he knows just about everything about college football. We do not, but we're going to start with the Atlantic Coast Conference. And of course, we talked about realignment, and the ACC, my conference, has some new teams, and that would be the Cal Bears, the SMU, is it Mustangs?
Yeah.
I think so. And the Stanford Cardinal. All of those do not reside on the Atlantic coast whatsoever. So this is an interesting conference now because I think the travel is going to be fascinating. And, some of the teams that they added in, very strong academically, not so much on the football field, at least recently.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Cal and Stanford are like GPA ads, and they are also an attempt, obviously, to develop a national footprint, right? A nationwide footprint. And that's the same thing that the Big Ten kind of had to do. The SEC is the only conference so far that is like proven that they can sort of stand alone in their own region without expanding nationally. It'll be interesting to see how that develops over the years as this whole thing continues to evolve. SMU, man, like I think it shouldn't go unstated that SMU is returning to power football.
Yes.
For the first time in nearly 40 years after receiving the death penalty in 1987. And it is, and it's to the ACC. And I know that like being a, group of five, that's, you're still playing, some of the power schools, but they are officially now in a power conference after, their time in the Southwestern Conference, which was a very good conference back in its day. But it's, I'm kind of excited about that. There's a little bit of nostalgia there, right? The Pony Express. And I think they probably would have fit a little bit better, geographically into the Big 12. But come on, like we threw geography out the window a long time ago when it came to college football conferences. So I'm not going to spend too much time getting hung up on that. I think they'll be a good fit. And, it stinks that Stanford's kind of been down here the last several years because they had some really good teams when Harbaugh was there.
Yep.
And then, and great players, right? Andrew Luck, Christian McCaffrey. But, in Cal, they've had
Aaron
moments
Rodgers.
where they've been decent, but like, when you think football power, Cal is not one of the teams that pops into your head.
You think of the band is on the field.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you look at this conference and if you talk about storylines, there's a couple of head coaches I think that I don't want to say they're on the hot seat, but I do wonder if another mediocre season out of them starts to get the heat turned up a little bit. And I think the first one has got to be Dabo. We are pretty far removed from their last national championship. And he has been very outspoken about not liking NIL, not liking the portal. And I think based off of how he feels about it and how he decides to recruit the old-fashioned way for the most part, that Clemson has been in a downturn and they're still in the preseason top 25. But I think that they've been fairly mediocre based off of the expectations that have been heaped upon them. Now, I know last year we did have a little bit of fun with his phone call with a fan who talked about that stuff, but let's be real. When you talk about the boosters, they want to win, and Clemson set a high bar in the old paradigm, and now Dabo is not performing. Is that fair?
I think it's fair. The criticism is fair. When you come off, two great NFL caliber quarterbacks and Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, it's tough, right, to bounce back. Or to sustain that over time. And, and DJ didn't turn out to be what everybody kind of thought he could be.
But he looked great at Oregon State, though.
He did. But I think he was streaky. He wasn't very consistent, at least in his time at Clemson. He wasn't very consistent.
Fair.
And then, last year was Cade Klubnik's first year starting. It sounds like, maybe with another year under his belt, he'll be more prepared to take things on this year. It sounds like people believe that, they are poised for a little bit of a resurgence this season, so we'll see. But you're right. You mentioned that Dabo doesn't like to, essentially refuses to use the transfer portal.
Yep.
And I think that's really going to be kind of the kiss of death for him if they don't win at the level that's expected, because he is choosing to do it this way. So
Yes.
it could be perceived that he's not exhausting all of his options to put the best team on the field possible. And, it would be interesting to see if there is some sort of ultimatum that is brought to him like, hey, like you either, if things don't go well this year, you either just start using the transfer portal to put the best team on the field, or it's time for you to move on.
Well, you can't lose players to the transfer portal, which is going to happen whether you use it or not to recruit, and then not try and at least replenish the ranks. Look, we both know that in order to recruit, now neither of us is recruited, but I think as a general concept, we understand that you can build through the portal and you want to build through high school kids. It's how you build a dynasty. You always have the ranks be replenished underneath, and you can fill in some of the gaps for some of the positions that you need to through the transfer portal. If he's not doing that, you're 100% right. He is not fulfilling his obligation to exhaust and do all of his due diligence. And it's partly because he's just being obtuse about this and not wanting to do it because he personally doesn't like it. Well, man, look, the amount of money that you're making, you better embrace it because it's part of the game now. Or do what Saban did and say, I'm out, and then just not be a part of it. It just seems very ignorant on his part for a guy that is now becoming, every year that goes by, further and further removed from his success. And I get what you're saying. Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson. But when you set the bar that high, you got to continue to produce. And they're just not doing it. I mean, they're doing it in a way that I would love 8-win seasons every year out of Virginia Tech. But that's not the bar that they set.
No, you're absolutely right. And especially, I think that there's just less, in the days of immediate gratification and social media, there just aren't the patience that maybe there once were, and fans get they get antsy, they get impatient, and they want to win, and loyalty takes a back seat to what is perceived improvement. If they think that they could move on to the next shiny thing, they'll do that in a heartbeat.
And the other coach I want to talk about is Mario Cristobal at Miami. And I joke every year that the U is back, but they have that expectation. And when they hired Mario Cristobal, a lot of people felt that this was the home run hire. This was the one that was going to truly get them back. A guy that is connected in his cultural roots to a lot of the people in Miami, a lot of people that are boosters, former players were looking for that splash hire. And Cristobal was that. And I would say that they've somewhat underachieved. In year one, you can give them a pass. But in year two, I believe, was it in year two that they had the kneel down that wasn't scandal where they should have won a game and they didn't? And look, you can make up for that, but this is kind of the time to do that. And they waited until the conference now has more players in it, and it seems like it's a little bit better top to bottom. But do you think he's in as much danger as I think he might be if they underachieve again?
I do, actually. I definitely do, because it's Miami's one of those programs. I think there's a few of them out there. Florida State, Texas, to name a few, where there's just sort of this expectation because there's some history there, and even though like maybe the dynamics have changed or whatever at these places, there's still the expectation to win. There's still the brand, right? You still have to represent the brand, and so um, he does have a lot of cultural ties, but I'm curious if I feel like Miami needs somebody that's going to bring like the swagger back to the U, right? Who's going to bring that vibe back to Coral Gables, and I don't know if Cristobal's the guy in that sense. The guy can coach football. There's no denying that.
Absolutely.
But and also though, how much does the school? How much do they really care about how good the football team is? I mean, that question has to be asked too. Like, what's going on behind the scenes in the athletic department as far as pouring whatever resources are necessary in order for them to be successful. And I would think that those are conversations that Mario Cristobal had with them during the interview process. So, a lot of coaches, he was in a good situation at Oregon. He didn't need to go anywhere. And, so I would think, he was in a position to say, okay, if I come, I need X, Y, and Z to happen to give us the opportunity to succeed. And, I'm kind of curious, I don't know anything about the inner workings of that program, but, you kind of wonder how much support they're getting from the university.
That's a fair point. The other coach I think is interesting is Mac Brown. He's like 98 years old, still out there coaching. And they just lost Drake May, obviously, to the New England Patriots. So they're going to have to get on without a top-tier quarterback. We'll see how that goes. But if we can talk about a dark horse for a second in the ACC. Now, I don't want to jinx it, but I am legitimately excited for the upcoming season for my Virginia Tech Hokies. Brent Pry, has, I don't know, there's excitement that is brewing in Blacksburg, and I think it's justified. The way that they ended the season last year, starting 2-4, ripping off 5 wins out of their last 7 games, winning their bowl game. There's a lot of expectations on this team, and that does worry me a little bit because whenever there's expectations, you have to come through with it. But I think you said it last year when I went to the game, and you said that Blacksburg is the kind of college town that is just waiting for a chance to erupt with a good team. And I think in the ACC this year, based off the fact they got 20 players returning from last year, Drone's back at quarterback. He looked really good. He got the reps. It's something I said he needed last year. This team has the potential to be a spoiler and make it the ACC championship game. And look, 7 wins last year after 3 in their first year. It's not crazy to think that their ceiling could be 10 wins. And as a Hokie fan, that excites me.
It is exciting, and they were in the others receiving votes for the top 25. I believe just 2 spots out of being number 25.
Yes, I did.
They're right there. So I think that nationally, a lot of people agree with you. And you're right though when you talk about expectations. I think it's very easy to go out there and play loose and carefree when there aren't any expectations like last year, where it's like, hey, let's just go out here and fly around and have fun and try to get the W. Now this year that there are some expectations, how do they handle that as a program? How do they handle adversity if they come up against it? Adversity hits different when there's expectations, and so we'll see how that's handled. But you're right, man. I did say that about Blacksburg. It's a powder keg, and there are a few of those places. And they don't just exist in college towns. There's a few pro towns like that are just like, because there's some towns, right, in college towns, pro towns. It doesn't matter how good the team is. Like, you're not going to see a change in like the vibe around the team and the city or anything like that. But there's others that like they just need a winner, man. They just need that little spark, and it turns into one of those special places. And there's a few places around the country that are like that, and Blacksburg is probably at the top of that list.
I appreciate you saying that. After 5 years there, it is a special place to me. And the last team I want to talk about is Florida State, coming off of not getting into the playoff last year. This is a team that could be one of those teams that either is ready for another big season in the ACC and could win it all, or the preseason ranking is going to doom them. We'll see. But I think the ACC is going to be better than it has been. I think that a lot of teams have improved, obviously adding, I don't want to say bottom feeders to the list, but certainly I think overall there is more competition there. So let's move on to the Big 12. I think it's fair to say that the Big 12 is the most intriguing new conference to you, correct?
Oh, for sure it is, man, because, again, just like the Big Ten and what the ACC has done, they have really expanded their footprint to be, to capture the entire country. And just they didn't add outside of like, I'll say Utah. I would say Utah is like a top tier team, but outside of Utah, they didn't add like a lot of like top tier teams, but they added a lot of programs from the tier right below that top tier. I think like teams that can have those special seasons, or teams that are on the rise a little bit, or teams that bring a lot of eyeballs and excitement like Colorado. So I'm very intrigued to see how the Big 12 plays out this year. Of course, yes, you lost the big boys in Texas and Oklahoma, but I think, replacing them with the Colorados and the Utahs and Arizona, who had a great year last year, it's going to be very interesting. It's a good, interesting mix of teams and programs, and there's some personality in that league, right? You have Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State. You've got, Coach Prime up in Colorado. So there's a little bit of personality and a little bit of character in that league. And I think, and there's some fun, exciting environments and campuses in that league too, that are going to be fun to keep an eye on, especially if some of these programs, West Virginia had a good year last year. They kind of surprised if they're able to be pretty solid. That's a place that can get really exciting when they've got it going well. And so it'll be really interesting to kind of see how things shake out and how these new teams from the West Coast, if you will, fit in.
It feels like whenever they created the Big 12 here, obviously they went to the Pac-12 and took a bunch of the teams that you said, the B-tier teams over there. And losing Texas and Oklahoma, you could say, would be a quality dip for this conference. But what they did with that is they went out and got 4 schools that almost kind of make the conference better top to bottom. I think that quality-wise, there's a lot of, you can look at this conference and think, okay, Utah has a chance, obviously. They have 5 teams in the top 25, which is a lot for a conference that has what you considered, quote-unquote, B-tier teams. I think this conference is going to be some of the best quality football. And I know people are going to say, yeah, the SEC, the Big Ten, but we expect that out of them. I'm talking about great games every week. And this could be almost like Maction. Big 12 could be like those games where every game is exciting because all these teams are pretty much equal. And yeah, there's going to be some teams and some schools that are going to rise as they always do. And that's why I'm worried about Colorado. You mentioned them. We cannot talk about the Big 12 without talking about Coach Prime, without talking about the Buffs. And they're polarizing already. So they went 4-8 last year. You and I were wrong in our week 1 analysis, but we're right overall about how their season ended up. Because you and I both thought they were going to be punched in the mouth early and have to go through some adversity. What we didn't know is that they were going to capture the nation for 3 games and then face that adversity and basically never win again. Right. So I think we can take like half a victory lap on that. But Coach Prime is always going to be who he is. However, as much as we love that around here, and as much as we're still rooting for the Buffs, this is kind of a put up or shut up moment for them. However, I think it's actually going to be more difficult this year than it was last year because I think their schedule is less heavy hitters and more consistency across the board. And consistency is the thing that they struggled with all season last year.
Yeah, they've improved some of the things like depth a little bit. They've gotten better to some positions, but they're not going to sneak up on anybody this year. You know, I think last year, most people, I think, felt about them the same way we did going into the season, that they were sort of like the traveling circus that was going to get punched in the mouth and then fall into oblivion. And, you know, that did not happen, which we were on the bandwagon, man. We love the excitement. And we are not Coach Prime haters here by any stretch of the imagination. If anything, we are Coach Prime supporters. But I do think that now you're right. Time to put up or shut up. You know, are they going to be able to back up all of the off the field noise and flair or whatever you want to call it that they bring to the table? Because it's kind of silly to it just doesn't work out to have all that but not have the wins and things to go along with it. Like you mentioned offline before the show, you know, all the flashing their watches and stuff like that. You can like it's like the U back in the day. You can get away with that shit when you're winning. You know what I mean? But you can't be losing and be out there trying to get your swagger on.
Well, it's like you said about Nick Sirianni. You can't be quirky and lose.
No, yeah. And what I'm really curious to see is this like has Dion put all of his chips like into this season? Because I'm so curious where he goes after Shedeur. Is he in this for the long haul? I mean, because there's no denying that he's definitely like a daddy ball guy. Like Coach Prime's all about playing daddy ball, and so like once Shadeur's done, like what's he do or what happens? God forbid that Shedeur gets injured early in the season. Does Prime just pack it in, you know, and like not care or lose interest? I mean, I hate to say that, but like he's definitely demonstrated that like I don't know. I feel like he is here because his son's here.
First of all, I think it's borderline disparaging to say that he would just pack it in. I mean, that's not
and that's a little hyperbolic, but lose interest a little bit maybe.
So I think that this is very nuanced, right? I don't think that it's a black or white issue. And I'm not talking about race. I'm talking about in general. A lot of people want to say one thing or the other about him. I sent you a story about Colorado and their oldest fan getting an NIL deal with Blenders, who's the one who makes his sunglasses. And you astutely said, yeah, but it's all about him. And it's not always that way. But the one thing about Coach,
though, because
I know. That's what I'm saying. The one thing about Coach Prime, though, is he's always going to coach and be the way that he is all the time. That's what made him successful as a player. It's what made him successful as a coach. What worries me, though, is to your point, when things get difficult for a long stretch. Now, last year, they did not play well. They lost a couple of games they shouldn't have. They had a chance to actually make a bowl game last year. And this year, they've been a little bit more about business. But I think, to your point, that he's got to figure out, he said last year, remember, you have to be in love with football. Well, he has to be in love with coaching at all times. And I think that he is to an extent, but we'll find out more about him when Shedeur Sanders isn't there. And what do you make of Shedeur Sanders not being a preseason All-American? To me, that almost feels like you got to prove it.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I think Shadur's a great player, but he was kind of a one-man show last year a little bit, especially after Travis Hunter went down, and he just, he had Dylan Edwards in the backfield, but again, like their offensive line was really bad last
Oh,
year, and
really
he was
bad.
running for his life most of the time. I mean, there were times I genuinely felt bad for him because he was just taking a beating, and and yeah, we saw some emotion from him at times, but I mean, like the fact that it wasn't worse, I think is a testament to like his character because most people would have absolutely crumbled under those circumstances. And do I think that it's I don't have a problem with him being left off, I guess. I think that he does
No.
have like he's got to win. And
Yes.
and he's going to have the chance to do that, and it's not going to be easy either. But also at the same time, I feel like this is like as much as like you're going to hear from Prime and whatever that he was snubbed, or I'm sure there's like he's acting mad about it or whatever. Like there's there's nothing more dangerous than a guy with his ability with a chip on his shoulder, and so maybe this is going to be part of that extra little uh, boost that he needs to take things to the next level.
See, he and Dabo are very similar. Now, last year in September, Dave from Political Football came on here when you couldn't make it, and we talked about the fact that they were very similar. And they're similar, but yet different. They both kind of have a very similar personality. Like Dabo is very animated and very, what's the word I'm looking for? Like he's very hard headed about the way that he wants to do things. And I think that Deion Sanders is the same way. And where they differ, though, is where Dabo doesn't want to use the portal, that's all Deion wants to do. Because I think that Deion Sanders, in his mind, the NIL stuff is something that is very important to him. And that's where he can really do the most damage when it comes to selling players. And I think that younger players who, in high school kids who are not in the system yet, it's a little bit harder. But as we said earlier with Dabo, you've got to be able to do both. And if Colorado has a disappointing season this year, and to me, disappointing would be not making a bowl game. If they go 6-6 and make a bowl game, I'm okay with that because you went from 1 win to 4 to 6. This is progression. It's not going to be overnight. But if they make it to a bowl game, he's going to have to figure out how the hell he's going to get his ass into some living rooms and get some of those high school kids at Colorado, because that is the only way that he is going to build a dynasty. Offensive linemen, defensive linemen, you don't just pick up elite guys on the portal. They're on the portal for a reason. You pick those guys up when you are following them and scouting them through high school and get them to your school using the same tactics. That's what I think we're going to be interested to see after this season is over.
And you know what? Money talks, as we've seen around the country. But at some point in time, if you want to keep being able to get great players in the portal, you got to win.
Yes.
You got to win, man. Like, no, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, these kids will take the bag, but they want to win too.
Oh, yeah.
And they want to play for championships. And if you can't offer that along with the bag of cash, especially when they have other options to go take the money and compete for championships elsewhere, you're going to have your work cut out for you, man. And so, really, I think no matter what it is, the most important thing is he's got to find a way to win. And he's going to have a chance this year. Like I said, I agree with you. 6 wins, a bowl game would be that would be improvement. I don't know if that's enough for him in his eyes. I don't know that you can set the bar any higher than that. Yeah.
No, but realism and also looking at the conference. They're not going to be a player in the conference. And I'm happy to be wrong. I'm happy to replay this all over TikTok and have people say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, sure. If they go 8-4, I'm a happy man because that means we got to watch some really, really fun football and see some really, really fun press conferences. But we can't talk about the Big 12 all night. So we're going to get to the 2 heavy hitters. Let's talk about the Big 10. So the SEC didn't change a whole lot. They gained a couple of teams. The Big Ten, in my eyes, had the biggest resurgence because I think that a conference that has been very top-heavy over the last couple of years, I think that's fair to say, they got a lot of quality teams or a lot of quality programs that could be consistently good. And the Big Ten now, to me, looks very, very solid. We're talking about Oregon, Washington coming off of a national championship berth. UCLA used to be something. And USC under Lincoln Riley has the potential to be very good. So 3 of those 4 schools could be, they could be players in this conference long term. Of course, you add that to Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. I'm not going to say the Big Ten is better than the SEC, but man, they're getting damn close.
Man, I might disagree with you. I think that definitely like I think the top of the Big Ten has gotten closer to being on par with the top of the SEC, but the depth just still isn't there. Like, I think if you take bottom half compared to bottom half, like I feel like the disparity is great. And so that's kind of what I think about when I'm looking at like comparing the two top to bottom. Now, do I think that bringing in Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA makes the Big Ten better? Does it close the gap? Absolutely, it does. And geography aside, like these are programs that do feel like they fit into the Big Ten. I feel like, and I'm just excited that we're going to get to see these Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Washington, Michigan, USC matchups. That's super exciting. And again, like we talked earlier, I think one of the benefits of conference expansion is more good games. And I think we're going to see that a lot. And also, it's fun for fans, man. I mean, I just think about here, like locally, like being able to, a fan being able to go to the University of Illinois game and see them playing Oregon, or USC or whoever, So that's an exciting thing that's going to be fun for a lot of these, especially like what I would call the bottom half, the Indianas, the Illinois, the Northwesterns. I mean, it's just so funny that we might see, I don't know what Northwestern schedule looks like, but we might see like Northwestern playing USC in front of 1,500 people at their practice facility along Lake Michigan at some point in time this year. I mean, it's funny, and it's also going to be fun to see these teams from out west, especially USC and UCLA, have to go play somewhere here in the Midwest in November. I'm looking forward to that.
I am too. And don't discount how much better this conference has gotten. And I understand the SEC is the top tier, but I'm just saying that they're getting close. They are closing that gap tremendously. Fair. And you're adding some programs here. Now, I will say this, though, for an Oregon, right? Oregon has been very good for a long time. Last 20 years or so, if you talk about all the Joey Harrington years and going to national title under Chip Kelly and everything, and they're fun and they're flashy. But it's been in the Pac-12, and they have not been given a lot of credit because they play in the Pac-12, because the Pac-12 has been pretty soft for the most part. Now, I know last year their swan song, it was amazing, but for the most part, a lot of people said, yeah, but they're in the Pac-12. And Washington last year didn't look nearly as good against Michigan as they had against everybody else. So there's something to be said about that. But can Oregon play with the real big boys now when they have to play on a potential yearly basis? Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, right? USC. I know they had to play USC, but you get my point, right? Now they're kind of in big boy football land. And we're going to see as a program if they were just flashy because of the conference that they played in. Personally, I think that they will change their recruiting style. I mean, Nike is backing them, so plenty of money to be thrown around there. But that's why I'm saying is I think just overall the conference, which used to feel like what you're talking about, watching the Northwesterns and Indianas, now feels like, hey, there's a lot more appointment television here.
Do you think if you are the Northwesterns and Indianas, Purdue's, Illinois of the world that you're like, man, like, did we just become even less relevant? I mean, and all those programs have had their moments. I don't want to take away from them too much, but do you feel like you're just getting pushed further down the ladder when, bringing in some of these programs?
Not when you're getting that big academic check.
Well, I guess, but the kid that plays left tackle, isn't, necessarily benefiting from.
He's getting a Northwestern education, damn it.
You're right. That's all that matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, right. Well, I'll tell you what, winning matters. And I think that the story in the Big Ten, if I'm being honest, is Ryan Day and Ohio State. Now, you and I both agree that they belonged at number 2 in the preseason poll. We didn't have an issue with that. I think that it's objectively true that they had a great offseason, right? Recruiting. They got a better quarterback. Their offense should be a little bit more consistent than it had been. Their defense was excellent last year. And they didn't have enough last year to make it. They lost to Michigan. What was it? The 3rd time in a row, I think.
Yeah.
And so Ryan Day's coming into the season. Old Jimmy Harbaugh is not there anymore. The conference has gotten better adding these teams. But the expectations, and that's sort of been a through line for this episode, expectations on Ryan Day, I have to think, are the highest in the country. What do you think?
I think they have to be. And to be honest, he hasn't really shown the ability to perform well under pressure.
I
I
agree.
mean, just even how, like, when they snuck out of Notre Dame by the skin of their teeth, just the way he reacted after the fact was he
Yes.
just seemed like a rattled man. And I cannot understand, like, I can't figure out why he hasn't in the last couple of years been able to bring in an elite quarterback. I mean, you have Will Howard coming in from Kansas State. He had a good season last year. Like, I'm not taking away from that at all. But like, you're Ohio State. You're Ryan, Ryan Day. You're supposed to be an offensive guru. You just hired Bill O'Brien to be your or no, excuse me, Chip Kelly to be your offensive coordinator. How like how have you been unable to get one of the best quarterbacks in the country to come play for you? I can't quite figure that out. That's really strange to me. It feels like there must be something off. And if he loses to Michigan under Sharon Moore, he's definitely done.
Ryan Day, though, if I'm being honest, he comes off as fake to me. And I don't get a good vibe from him.
He comes off as an asshole to me.
Well, fake and asshole, in my opinion, are kind of in the same realm. Like, you're not consistently genuine and also a dick. I guess you could be. But my point is like, I don't get a good vibe from Ryan Day. Like, he doesn't, to me, fit the pedigree of a national championship winning coach at Ohio State. I mean, I guess the bar is set really low with Urban Meyer. But the point is like, I mean, before him, Jim Tressel, right? Think about what Ohio State football meant. And like, I have a hard time taking him seriously. I had a hard time before when I think he looks like Santa Claus at Tim Allen, but also after he went after Lou Holtz. Look, Lou Holtz is a
Like
senile old
90.
man. Okay. Like, what do you care what he has to say about your football program? Not to mention the fact that all the greatest coaches usually don't react that way.
No, and like you should have been like grateful and got on the bus and got the hell out of there because like
hell yeah,
you didn't win that game. Notre Dame lost that game. Like
yes,
and so like you just need to thank your lucky stars. You got the dub and go home. And I hope he doesn't win a national championship because I feel like he would be insufferable. Oh my goodness, man! Like I can't even imagine a world with Ryan Day and a national title.
Take a page out of Mike Tomlin's book when he said, "We're just happy to get out of stadium alive." That's what you should have said after the Notre Dame game. But I honestly, if they make the playoff, he probably keeps his job. But let me ask you, if he makes the playoff but they lose to Michigan, let's say Michigan has a down year comparatively, and that's their only loss, they win the Big 12. Do you think he still doesn't, or do you think he still gets fired if they don't win a national championship?
If he loses to Michigan
4 times in a row,
if he loses to Michigan, anything short of winning a national championship, I think is a strong possibility it would result in him losing his job.
And this is
which
a team,
is preposterous, but like
sort of. I mean, look, like in that land, there is only one game that matters, and it's one of the last true rivalries that does matter. Now, you and I are both traditionalists in this regard, where we miss the days.
The game.
I know. And so it does matter tremendously on a national level, right? It's one of the only games that matters on a national level. And I'm not saying he's hired to win that game, but it certainly is not great when you don't win it. And remember, before Jim Harbaugh went on this little heater that he went on, he had a terrible record against Michigan State, against Ohio State. And we're starting to question, maybe Jimmy's on the hot seat and he turned things around. Ryan Day has got to turn things around. But I honestly, I don't think that he has it in him as a head coach. And I think that this team will be excellent as they always are, but they won't make it to the big dance in that way. And we'll be talking about this again.
Can you imagine, like, let's step aside from the fact that we think Ryan Day is a gigantic asshole. Could you imagine, like, having to function on a daily basis? Now, they get paid very handsomely to do so, but having to function on a daily basis under the pressure that has to exist there.
Oh, sure.
In those circumstances, it has to be incredible.
Sure.
To know that you have hundreds of thousands of people who are literally analyzing every decision that you make. I mean, short of being like the freaking president, like it's got to be being like a major college football coach, or it has to be one of the most stressful jobs there could be. And I don't think any of these guys would trade it for the world because they love it. But I just cannot. I mean, I can't imagine what that must feel like.
That's what you signed up for.
I mean, me and then, Kevin there with the Bring Back Urban Meyer, we coached high school football, and I know what that felt like at a high school where nobody gave a shit about whether the team won or lost. I know what that felt like. I can't imagine what it feels like at Ohio State or Michigan or wherever.
Go coach
Alabama. At
Bishop Sycamore if you don't want expectations, right? Like, this is Ohio State. You wanted this head coaching gig, like, don't complain when the expectations are super high. This is college football, big time college football. You're not taking a low level job. You're taking one of the jobs. And if you can't perform in the games that they need you to perform, you're out. That's the way it works, man.
Is Urban Meyer going to be like the Bill Cowher of the NFL, where every time, I feel like forever, every time an NFL job would open up, Bill Cowher's name would come up. It's like now every time a college job opens up, a big time college job, they're like Urban Meyer, like his name's. How long until that sort of fades?
There's a big difference there. If you were considering Bill Cowher for your NFL head coaching position, you were considering what seemed like a morally decent person. If you're considering Urban Meyer, you're deciding that you don't give a shit about any of that stuff and you just need to win, baby. And that's what it's come down to.
That's the culture that exists in a lot of places in college football, though. Honestly. Can
you imagine him, though? Like, imagine Urban Meyer coaching in, like, Arkansas or some stupid,
That's a place where they would be completely okay with.
I know. That's what I mean. That's why I said it, because I'm like, oh, they have no scruples whatsoever. They would totally do it. Mississippi State, any of those. I mean, imagine him at Iowa. Takes over for Kirk Ferentz.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like Iowa wouldn't I don't know if they'd get on board with it.
They wouldn't let him waive. That's the only thing in his contract. He's not allowed to do the waive. He's like, don't do that. Like, you don't deserve it. So the Big Ten should be interesting to watch. And we're going to have a ton of games and we're going to find out. And I think over the next decade, if it remains intact the way that it is now, I might be right. I might be right in the sense that the SEC and the Big Ten might be on par. But let's talk about the
They'll
SEC.
Eventually be the same conference league or something.
Sure. I'm sure that, yeah, you're probably right. Now, I know we didn't talk about Michigan. We could have talked about Penn State, but I think that there's more interesting things to talk about in the SEC. So the SEC grew by 2 members, Oklahoma, Texas. Obviously, those 2 programs speak for themselves. Now that game is going to be a conference game. The Red River rivalry will be a conference game, which is just bonkers to me. But hey, the SEC got a team that's coming off of a playoff berth, and Oklahoma, which could be on the rise with Brent Venables. However, they lost Nick Saban, which still kind of feels weird.
Yeah, it's definitely weird. Now, hold on a minute. So, hasn't the Red River
I can't say it either.
Been a conference game for a long time?
Well, yeah, but like I'm saying, like yes, you're right about that. But my point is like it's like it just moves to the SEC.
Oh, sure.
Like it's just a weird thing. Like they have not had any years where they've kept that rivalry in any way. It's like they both move, because you think like one of the 2 of them would not move with each other, but they're so married at the hip to each other. Yes, it has always been a conference game, but you get my larger point.
No, you're right. No, the SEC is going to be interesting because obviously you have Kalen DeBoer taking over at Alabama. I think that's like the biggest like storyline or unknown thing to see how that goes. You have Kirby at Georgia, which they are the perceived favorite right now, not just in the conference, but in the country as far as winning a national championship. Texas, who's coming off of a playoff berth, returns a lot of guys. Quinn Ewers is back, although I'm sure people will be clamoring for Arch Manning at the first mistake that happens, which is so stupid. And, of course, Oklahoma's always solid. Can Brent Venables, build on last year's, kind of some of the successes they had last season? Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss, I think they're sort of right on the periphery of like threatening to be in the conversation at the top of the league. And it's so weird that we've gone through all these teams and we haven't mentioned even LSU yet.
Nope.
Brian Kelly and, hey, okay, you just lost your offensive coordinator and the Heisman Trophy winner. What's this look like now? Mm-hmm. And, so we'll see if he can rebound from that. And then, let's see if Missouri can build on the success they had last year in the SEC and still be a contender. It appears that a lot of people believe they will be, but we'll see.
It's like, can Missouri turn into the Iowa of the Big Ten, where they're constantly on the cusp of, hey, maybe they can be a playoff team, but they're going to finish with 10 wins and be like number 23 or something at the end of the year. But they'll always be solid. Like they sort of are ascending into that role recently. But with the conference the way that it is, a couple things. First of all, I know we just said that Ryan Day had probably the highest expectations or the hottest seat under him. And the reason I say that is because I think Kalen DeBoer slightly gets a pass because he's following up a legend. I think this year, it's not quite the same level as it will be, say, next year, because he's inheriting Jalen Milroe and a team that obviously went to the playoff. There's a lot of players that are going to be returning. And I think that the name with Saban kind of still around the program, probably helping out a little bit, the name, the face, he gets a little bit of a pass, I think. And maybe I'm wrong.
I listened to someone else today that had the same thoughts. They thought that he'd get like a year to kind of like acclimate. And then, next season, the expectations would really ramp up. The person that he was talking to, there's another podcast, I don't remember the name, otherwise I give him credit. But his co-host would disagree. His co-host is like, dude, I think you're way overestimating the patience of the Alabama fans. And the first time they lose a game, like their minds are gonna melt, and which is probably true, and that's true no matter who the coach is. That would have been true if Saban was the coach. The difference is how does Kalen DeBoer handle it?
Right.
How does he bounce back? And it'll be interesting to see how Nick Saban handles it on College game day, if and when he's put in a position where he has to like comment on Alabama and what's happening there and Kalen DeBoer, especially if things start going a little sideways.
It's not a guarantee that even though they obviously are bringing back a seasoned quarterback and they obviously have recruited well, that they're going to be able to get through. I mean, the thing that Nick Saban brought to the table, and I say this a lot about coaches, is that there is no scenario that he hadn't seen before, for the most part. So you're coaching fearlessly. Now, I know that Kalen DeBoer just came off of a national championship berth, obviously, with Michael Penix Jr. and Rome Odunze. So, like, lots of talent there. He can recruit, no doubt. But the game is completely different in the SEC. And he has not been in a situation like that yet. And I'm talking about, like, let's take last year. Jalen Milroe, was it 4th and 31? Throws that pass and they convert in the Iron Bowl, right?
Yes.
I don't think he's quite been in that scenario. Yes, he's been in some tight games, but it's not the Iron Bowl, right? It's not quite the pageantry, the tradition that goes along with a game like the Iron Bowl. And so you might be right, and the other podcasters might be right, that maybe the Alabama fans won't have any chill. I'm just talking about boosters because Nick Saban is still, again, hanging around in the periphery. And if he comes out and behind closed doors, because he obviously works for game day, and says, hey, look, give him a chance, then I think they're going to give him a chance. But I think it's interesting, though, that Sark is in this conference now and he turned down this job. Like, he could have been the coach and he's like, nah, I'm good.
I don't blame him. I mean, Texas is a really good place to be. Yeah. I don't blame him one bit. I mean, why put yourself in that situation? But yeah, one thing, I mean, you lose a game at Washington, the fans, they go home and they go on with their lives. You lose a game in Alabama and you will think that like there's been a national disaster. I mean, it will literally like, I would bet if there was a way to measure like the productivity of people in the state of Alabama, like the week after a loss, like I guarantee you it would be like at an all-time low. Domestic violence would probably peak at an all-time high. I mean, it would be, people will become unhinged. I mean, it just means that much to them. I mean, I hate to
I know.
piggyback on the SEC. It means more, but it does. There's no denying that.
No,
there's not much else to be that excited about in Alabama.
Fair point. I have been there once, and I can confirm in some form or fashion that is true. But I don't know. I like to think that when he came on board, that he understood the assignment. But the Alabama fans also, man, maybe this should go on TikTok, but it's like they were leaving games early. So like you had chill then because it was like, we always win. And now when you have a new head coach and he loses a game when he's trying to figure his shit out, it's like you have no chill now. You have to decide one or the other. Either be all in or have all chill. You know what I mean?
Well, it's like they haven't lost more than 2 games in a season for like 15 years or something. I mean, it's we'll see. I hopefully for Kalen DeBoer's sake, I hope you're right. You know what? And hey, the best thing for him, just don't lose, man. You'll be just fine.
Yeah, right. Now, well, I'll tell you, somebody who has something to say about that would be Kirby Smart. I'm going to go on record and say that I think Georgia is going to be on a revenge tour after getting stubbed from the playoff. Kirby Smart is not going to take that sitting down. I see a 18-1 Patriots coming up here.
I think you might be right. He seems like the type of guy that sort of carries a chip on his shoulder for sure. You know, can they overcome some of the off the field stuff and get it together and play some ball? We'll see. I think they will. I mean, this happens all around the country all the time where there's distractions and all this crap. I mean, look at what the hell was going on in Florida when they were on their run, you know? So I think they'll be just fine. And yeah, you're right. And the 12-team playoff, though, adds a different element because it's one
Sure.
thing to be like to sit there and be like licking your chops for a month and preparing to play, 2 games in 10 days or whatever it is. It's another thing to have to go 3 or 4 in a row. We've never seen anybody have to do that, obviously, at the college level. So, and especially if you have to play in a conference championship game, which that's one thing that I think plays. Even though Notre Dame cannot be seated higher than fifth and will have to play in the first round, they don't have to play in a conference championship game. So if you have to play in a conference championship game, I think with a 12-team playoff, it's almost like detrimental to have to play in a conference title. And so like you're gonna have that game, and then I don't know, a week or two later, boom, first round of the play. Well, you might get a bye. So, but then once you start playing, I mean, you're playing. If you have a bye, you have to win 3 in a row. That's the first time anyone will have to have done that. 3 games in 3 weeks. And
No,
can you sustain that level of like vitriol for a month
oh yeah. That I think
against the best in the country?
I think that Georgia is built to do this in a way. And I think that there's other programs that are built to do it, but the 12-team playoff, you're right, it does add intrigue because obviously there's a lot of upsets that can take place. But in football, when you get to the end of the season, upsets don't happen nearly as often because the season is tough. It's a grind. And when you build your team the way that Kirby Smart has built his teams over the last couple of years, you've got the horses to be able to go. And some of the other programs that may be in the playoff maybe don't. I just see Kirby Smart as the guy who the first day back at practice after the spring, getting into the spring, slapping the playoff rankings up there and saying, that's our target. We're getting them all back because I think that he may internally see himself as possibly the next Saban because he obviously was from the same tree, finally got over the hump and beat Nick Saban a couple of times, and now it's him, and he is like the top dog in terms of coaches in that league.
Yeah, he is. But like you said, nobody is, you said you feel like they're built to do this. Thing is, we don't know. Nobody's ever had to do it. This is brand new for everyone. Like, because in the past, in the 14 playoff, we'd be like, oh, well, this team's been here before. They've had this long layoff and then come back for these 2 games and so on and so forth. These coaches know how to handle these situations. Like, this is brand new for everyone, which I think is really interesting and is going to create for some interesting situations. Because we're going to find out, like, we're going to finally see for the first time in college football, are there coaches or players who become known as like, hey, are you a regular season coach or are you a playoff coach?
Okay.
You know what I mean? And I think that that's something that's going to become a thing in college football. Because let's say Lane Kiffin, let's say the Ole Miss finishes 3rd or 4th in the SEC, but they make the playoff, and but when they get to the playoffs, like they're ridiculous. Like, Lane Kiffin gets the reputation of being a playoff coach. He can't win the SEC, but like if he gets in the playoff, like his team's dangerous. And, we see that in the NFL. Like there's times where I feel like historically in the NFL, some of the most dangerous teams are like the wild card teams that like get hot and go on a late run to get in. And we've seen in college football that there's a lot of recency bias when it comes to the rankings. It's what have you done for me? What have you done for me lately? So if you have a team that maybe struggles early, but finishes strong, but fails to win their conference and has that momentum, they finish good enough to get in the playoff. I don't know that I want to play that team. And that's a dynamic that has never existed in college football before.
Georgia don't care. That's what I'm here to tell you right now.
Go
Georgia
Dogs.
don't care. Georgia don't care. Go Dogs. That's right. But there's a lot of intrigue in the SEC. And one thing I think we can safely say is that each week there's going to be great games in that conference because there's just so many great teams. But you mentioned your team, Notre Dame. So let's get to the other portion of this because Notre Dame still famously without a conference. And so, as you said, they can make the playoff. They can be dangerous, but they are limited as to where they can be slotted. So how do you feel about Notre Dame coming into this season?
Well, there's a lot of hope, of course, but I think that, this is year 3 for Notre Dame coaches is a very it's got a real reputation to it. Lou Holtz won a national championship in his 3rd year. I think Dan Devine won a national championship in his 3rd year. Brian Kelly went to a national championship in his 3rd season. So there's a lot of weight that's put on year 3 for Notre Dame coaches. At this point in time, I mean, the roster is essentially Marcus Freeman's guys. So, we'll kind of see where, has he taken the steps? I thought he showed improvement last year. in his first season, I thought that he did a better job of having his team ready to play in the big game. Or excuse me, he struggled to have his team ready to play in the big games. Last year, I thought that they seemed to be, ready to play in the big games, but he had a hard time keeping his team up for the other games. So, I mean, there was just a weird dynamic. So we'll see if he's worked some of that stuff out. Obviously, Riley Leonard coming in from Duke to play quarterback. We'll see if the injury history rears its ugly head. Hopefully not, because he's extremely talented. The big question mark for Notre Dame is the offensive line. They're very talented, but they are very young and inexperienced on the offensive line. And they've already had a couple injuries in the preseason, season-ending injuries to a couple, to a starter. And so, that's, and going out week one against Texas A&M, who has one of the top 10 defensive lines in the country, who's going to be coached by Mike Elko, who's a great defensive coach. So that'll be a very interesting matchup between Notre Dame's offensive front and Texas A&M's defensive front that certainly will dictate the outcome of that game. And I think that the offensive line, because of their talent level, will come along as the season goes, but will they play well enough week one to win? One thing that's going to keep Notre Dame in the game week one, regardless of the offensive output, is they're going to have one of the best defenses in the country. They return a couple All-Americans on defense. Al Golden had, put one of the best defenses in the country on the field last year. There's no reason to believe that's not going to be the case again this year. Returning Xavier Watts and Benjamin Morrison, and Jack Kaiser's in like his 7th year at Notre Dame. He's like the only Brian Kelly recruit that's still, I think, on the roster. And so they got some dudes on defense. They've got a lot of unproven talent, I will say, on offense. At some places, it's just there's more question marks on offense. You have the new offensive coordinator, Mike Denbrock. So whole new system, some new players, some young players. Thankfully, the defense should be good enough to give, the offense isn't going to have to do what we said Caleb Williams had to do last year and go out and score 50 points. I mean, they're not going to be put in a position to do that very often. And so that's a good thing. But, starting off at Texas A&M, week one is a tall task. And so I think they'll be up for the challenge. I expect, though, I told my dad earlier, I think it'll be a low-scoring game. It'll come down to the wire, just because I think that Notre Dame will still be working some things out on offense. I don't expect some offensive explosion, and I think that they'll be able to kind of contain Texas A&M defensively. So a lot of stuff to be excited about the Irish. Their schedule, it doesn't look great on paper. I mean, there's some solid games. Florida State's on there. Obviously, USC every year. Louisville, I think they were just out of the top 25, or maybe they were on the tail end of the top 25.
They were right above Virginia Tech.
Yeah. So, there's some good games on the schedule, but there's not a ton that are going to jump off at you. So, they're going to have their opportunity to make a case for themselves to make the playoff, especially if they can take care of business against the big boys along the way. And then, of course, not stumble or play down to some of the other teams on the schedule.
So how do you feel about Marcus Freeman's job security depending on how this season goes?
Oh, I think he's fine. I mean, barring like a total implosion, I think he's fine. I don't think he's going anywhere. But I'll say this much. It does seem that he has anything that you could want outside of Notre Dame, drastically reducing their academic standards. Outside of that, almost anything you could want or need to be successful at Notre Dame, he has now, in his favor. There's things, there are boxes that are now checked that have never been checked for any coach in Notre Dame history to make his job easier. So there aren't any excuses. And like I said, with the roster being pretty much turned over at this point and all being Marcus Freeman guys, you can no longer, you can take all the credit now, because it can't be Brian Kelly kind of had something to do with recruiting that guy and this guy, but you also have to take all the blame. And, so we'll see how it goes. But I mean, I love the guy, man. There's just, I don't know how anyone, even if you a Notre Dame hater, could listen to him and be like, man, I hate that guy. He's a likable guy. He's got a great personality. Seems like he's got tremendous character, and he goes about things the right way. And, but at the end of the day, man, we've talked about a ton tonight, you got to win. You got to win games.
Hey, at least this season, that every 1st and 10 is not going to be a handoff to Audric Estime. So
That's true. That's very true for two reasons. One, he's gone, and two, we have a real offensive coordinator now.
That's correct. So there is a lot to look forward to. But if I had to put you on the spot, is Notre Dame going to make the playoff?
Yes.
And do you think
very confident in that?
I was going to say very confident. All right. And, if they make the playoff, as you say, everybody's got a chance. So they are a little bit limited in only being able to be as high as 5. But hey, you can only do what you can do. And I think Notre Dame one day will join a conference, but I think they're going to wait it out. I think they're going to wait until all this stuff blows up and there's 2 giant conferences of 32 teams, and they'll just dive in whenever that happens. But right now, there's really not that much incentive for them to jump in a conference.
No, I mean, they're doing just fine revenue-wise. And
yeah,
I get it, man.
Like,
no, I would love to see, I'd love to see them have the interconference rivalry with the Michigans, the Ohio States, and the Penn States, and with Oregon. They're a great fit in the Big Ten for obvious reasons. What would piss me off is if they decided to join a conference at some point, and it's like the ACC or some shit. Which, I mean, they already have like the pseudo partnership with the ACC where they play like 6 ACC games every year, and they're in the ACC for pretty much every other sport. It's I would be very disappointed if they joined one and it wasn't the Big Ten or the SEC.
Hey,
but they're also sort of like arrogant enough that they think that like, well, we're Notre Dame, like we make your conference relevant, and I think that that's the way they would see joining, whether with a Big 12 or ACC. Is like, well, you may not be relevant now, but you are once you have us. Which that's a mentality I don't care for a whole bunch. But you're right, though. I do think there will come up to a tipping point where their hand's going to be forced and they'll have to join a conference.
Well, look, week 0 is coming up, and there's only one game happening this week between now and the next time we go live, and that is Florida State at Georgia Tech. So the ACC is starting off this year, and a team that we already talked about in Florida State, who obviously got snubbed for the playoff last year, still projected to be a really, really great team. They're 10.5-point favorites on the road against the Ramblin' Wreck from Georgia Tech. So that is the one game to watch out for this week. And then next Thursday is when we really start this season in earnest. So we're not going to get into that because we will talk to you all next Wednesday. So, man, we went through all of college football pretty much in a flash, my man. So how do you feel about it?
I feel good. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we could have dug deeper into, and we didn't, which is fine because we got all season to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And these stories are going to write themselves. They don't need us to prognosticate too much. It's so nice that it's here finally. College football is here. We talked about the other night. I feel like something's been missing from my life, and it is returning. And I'm very, very excited. I cannot wait, especially for next Saturday when Notre Dame tees it up.
Absolutely, my man. But you know what? Before we get to the end of the episode, we got some business to conduct. Iceman stat of the week, as I like to do every single week. Give a stat. You know what, man? I'm so excited about the season. I have 2 for you this week. Are you ready?
I would expect nothing less.
Okay. Well, maybe these aren't stats, but they're at least in the wheelhouse. So, 1936 is a year that happened. However, the reason I bring this up is because I want to give to you a comparison of the preseason AP top 10 today and what it was in 1936. So we already went over the top 10 for 2024. Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Penn State, Michigan, Florida State. In 1936, some of these are amazing. Number 1, Minnesota. Number 2, Duke. Number 3, Army. Number 4, Northwestern. Then we have Purdue, USC, Notre Dame, Washington, Pittsburgh, and Yale.
Wow. I knew. If you would have said, tell me one team that's on that list, Army would have been, my guess for sure.
Absolutely.
Notre Dame, great, man.
Notre Dame in the 7th spot in both.
Are they the only team that's on both lists?
I believe that they are, yes. Some of these are hilarious because we talked about them, like Northwestern being on this list.
Timeless.
That's right. A lot of academic schools on here, just going to point that out. But my real stat is something that I have shared with you, but I want to share it here for all of the sports fans because, as you know, we are a show for the every fan, and I think that this is important. So, according to major marriage publication The Knot, Saturday, October 12th is one of the 5 most popular wedding dates in 2024. And wouldn't you know it, I will be at a wedding on that date. And so here is some of the college football slate for that day as of today. Number 2, Ohio State versus number 3, Oregon. Number 4, Texas against number 16, Oklahoma. Number 6, Ole Miss against number 13, LSU. And number 8, Penn State versus USC. So I will be at this wedding, but I will be in the corner watching college football on my phone.
Dude, I told you already. So like my daughter made travel softball. So we're playing this fall, and that weekend we have a tournament that goes from Friday night through Sunday. I don't obviously I have no clue what the game times are or whatever else. But just like you, I will certainly have phone in hand. If there are any long breaks between games, I will be finding the nearest establishment with a television, and trying to take in as much of this as possible, because every Saturday is great, but one that's got matchups like that is hard to miss. And of course, they look great now. A lot can change between now and then, but I got a feeling that's going to be an epic Saturday.
With my luck, they'll all be in the top 10 by the time we get there. But we do have one more thing to conduct. Yes, Coach's pick of the week. It has been a while, sir. You're undefeated in 2024. The last time you picked a game was the UFL, XFL, SFL, USFL championship, whatever it is. All those guys are bagging groceries these days, but you picked the Stallions. I think they are from Alabama, Birmingham maybe, over the San Antonio Brahmas. So they won. You are 2-0, and we need to revive this again for all of our people. So would you please, for the first time in this football season, bless us with a picketh of the week?
Hear ye, hear ye.
Perfect.
Come, drinketh from my goblet of knowledge that I am about to bestow upon you. This is guaranteed to lead to great wealth and power if you follow my lead.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you've heard or not, but there is a group of young men that play the game of football for Delaware State University. They are known as the Hornets. They are traveling across nearly 7 time zones, practically to yesterday, to play against the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors this Saturday. Of course, like any team with a functional brain, they thought, hey, it would be a great idea to arrive early and acclimate for a few days so we don't feel like we are playing in the past. But unfortunately today, they missed their flight.
I was going to say.
Out of New York, and a 10-hour flight at that. And I imagine that Delaware State University doesn't have the resources to just drum up a private jet or whatever it takes to get them there quickly. That being said, do not despair, my friends. I predict that with all the chaos that is ensuing amongst the Hornets, that they will not even have time to overthink things. And despite the 38.5-point spread,
39.
I just do not think 39 now. That's fine. It was 38.5 an hour ago. 39. I do not think that the Rainbow Warriors have it in them to beat the tired Hornets from the future on Saturday. And so I am going to take, I don't think they have it in them to beat them by 40. Maybe 39, but certainly not 40. So I am taking the Delaware State Hornets plus 39 to cover the spread against the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors this weekend.
The Delaware time-traveling Hornets, Delaware State, over the Rainbow Warriors, you say, in Honolulu, a place that I have been not once, not twice, but 3 times. And let me tell you, the Aloha Stadium was a shithole. However, as tradition, Coach, so let it be written, so let it be done. You know, I had the schedule up here for week 0, and I only had the top 25 up. So I do apologize to Montana State, New Mexico, SMU, Nevada, Delaware State, and Hawaii, because all of you are playing this Saturday. It just was not on my phone. However, I thought, no joke, I thought you were going to make that pick and you didn't know that they missed the flight. And I was so prepared to make you rethink all of your life.
No, man, I knew it. I mean, that's honestly one of the biggest reasons why I picked him, because there's a story there. I do need to invest in like one of those little hats with like the feather in it. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Give me one of those little hats or whatever for my prognosticating. But yeah, I what a wild story, huh? And I just cannot imagine like what that's going to cost. I don't know, but by the time I hadn't heard if they had figured anything out by the time we started this, but it sounded like they were maybe going to try to split the team up in the groups
What a
and send them.
disaster.
I mean,
What a disaster. Like,
it's
I
on
can tell
par with
you.
the Arizona Final Four stuff. Remember, or not Arizona, UConn Final Four
Yes.
in Arizona, right?
Right. Except that was other teams trying to gain an advantage against the team that clearly was better
Right.
than them in this. Like, think about it. If you're on the Delaware State team, you're thinking, I get a trip to Hawaii. And look, the flight is long. I'm going to tell you that right now. And it gets broken up. So I don't even know what flight they had, but if they had a direct flight, bless them. Because there was
So it was 10 hours from Newark.
There's no way they were going to win that football game regardless, because that flight is so long. And to your point, Delaware State probably doesn't have the resources to charter a really nice first-class jet. So they were probably slumming it up in coach like the rest of us, like sardines on a plane. It's brutal. And I don't know where they play now. Aloha Stadium, I think, is condemned now. So I don't think that they play there anymore, but they used to. That's where they used to play the Pro Bowl. And it's a shithole, just such a shithole. The University of Hawaii, too. No shade at anybody who goes there or listens, but also not the greatest either. The dorms leave a little bit something to be desired. So we'll see. That'll be interesting to watch. I definitely hope that Hawaii doesn't win by the way, the spread, I think the over-under was 57.5. And the spread is 39.5, which is nuts. So, like, I think they're expecting Hawaii to win like 55-0.
That is crazy.
Yes.
But it's not going to happen. It's not happening. You've already heard it here. You might as well etch it in the stone. It's happening.
That is correct. So we have come to the end of the episode. We've gone over college football. We would like to know what you think about this upcoming season. If you are watching on YouTube, you can call or text the number. It is area code 703-718-6314. It is a U.S. phone number for any of our international listeners and watchers. I don't know. You could be out there. And of course, if you want to get in touch with us on social media, we're all over the place at I&C Sports or at Iceman and Coach is what you can search on any of the fun social media platforms we have out there. If you're listening in audio to this, we thank you. You can always leave us a review, leave us a rating, all that good stuff. We do appreciate that stuff. And of course, if you want to support the Matty Ice Media Network with other stuff we got going on, you can certainly do that, sir. Next Wednesday, we start Football Frenzy. I want to remind everybody, every Wednesday, 9 o'clock. Replays, Saturday morning, Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Are you ready, sir?
Dude, I'm so ready. You know this.
I'm pumped. You should be pumped. The season is here. Football is here, and that means we are at our best. So I hope this finds everybody well. I hope this finds everybody safe. And folks, we will see you in the future. It'll be Football Frenzy. This is Iceman and Coach. The opinions and viewpoints expressed on I&C Sports are those of Matt Freites, Brad Powell, and their guests, and not necessarily those of the Matty Ice Media Network. I&C Sports is exclusively owned by Matt Freites and Brad Powell and is brought to you by the Matty Ice Media Network.